Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, I turn the mic around on the Globe and Mail retail reporter Susan Krasinski-Robertson for a lively and engaging conversation on the tradecraft of a retail reporter and the key stories Susan is focused on for 2021. So when you see your name on the call display or coming through or in your email box, what's your advice to retailers?
Yeah, pick up, please. That would be great.
Step one, yes.
I think that the answer to both of those questions is actually kind of the same, Michael. I think that it is tempting to want to have a PR strategy for everything, to want to have those gatekeepers in the way. The way Marina functioned and the way that I want to function in this industry as I get to know people is to be talking to the decision makers. And the best way to either deal with me when I'm calling or get my attention is to make sure that I'm in touch with those decision makers, because I can't do my job if I'm not talking to the people who know what's going on in their companies on the ground. Let's listen in now.
Susan, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
Not bad, thanks. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for taking the opportunity to be on the other side of the mic so far. So I hope this is going to be fun for you. I'm really interested in both your tradecraft and your perspectives on the retail industry. You're a newbie relative, I say, to the retail industry. So really excited to have the opportunity to do some chit and chatting with you. Let's just jump right in. Tell us about yourself, personal, professional journey. You and I actually share something in common. We both went to McGill and Carleton, so we got a bit of an intersection point in our lives there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But take it through us.
Yeah, my name is Susan Krasinski-Robertson, and I'm the retailing reporter for the Globe and Mail. I've been with the Globe now for, I can hardly believe it, but it's almost 12 years as a business reporter. Wow. Yeah. And I took over the retailing beat, as you know, after my good friend and colleague Marina Strauss retired in 2019. So some very, very big, very stylish shoes to fill. And as you mentioned, yes, I went to McGill in undergrad, and I did my master's in journalism at Carleton. And I've been at the Globe pretty much ever since. And my background, I don't have a background as much in the retail industry, but I have an interesting connection, actually. A fun fact about me is my family, my mom is born in the U.S. I'm born in Canada, but my mom is American originally, and her mom's family were in the retail biz in Chicago. They actually owned a chain of department stores. My grandmother's maiden name was Wiebolt, and Wiebolt's used to be the place to go to get all of your department store needs. And so I wonder often, as I wonder many times about my grandma, who I miss very much, what she would say about me covering the industry that her father and grandfather spent so many years in Chicago.
That's a neat connection. It's almost like in your DNA a little bit, the retail gene, as we sometimes call it. Now, a question for you. When I went to Carleton, the School of Journalism there was very, very well regarded. Now, you went from an undergrad in McGill to a master's at Carleton. Tell me about what's the difference between an undergrad in journalism and a master's in journalism. Why would you pick that path? What do you do differently in the master's program? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. Part of the reason I picked the master's is because I had already done my undergrad. So that's one reason. But, the difference is, to some extent, the depth of the work, the projects that you do. The Carleton undergrad program is also very comprehensive, and I have friends who went through that as well and worked just as hard as I did. So it really is, I think, about, it's a condensed length of time. You are in different classes, but you're learning many of the same skills. And you're doing, in some cases, just a little bit deeper work on the academic side of things and in terms of the final projects that you have to produce in order to achieve the master's degree. And again, I haven't been there in a number of years, so it may well have changed since I've been there. It would be a good thing to probably catch up on what they do these days.
Let's talk about being a reporter for a bit. So, as you said, you weren't new at the Globe and Mail. I think you were covering the marketing scene in the business file prior to retail. Was retail is that a prime gig to get in at a paper like the Globe and Mail, or is it who wants it, hands up strategy? Give me a bit of insight. I'm kind of curious as to is that retail? Everybody wants to be in retail, or everybody kind of says, I don't know, maybe I do, maybe I don't. How does that work?
Oh, I think it's a great beat. I think it's one of the best beats of the paper. And, when I heard that Marina was leaving us, for a well-deserved retirement, as sad as I was that she wasn't going to be my desk mate anymore and that I wasn't going to have the wonderful skill building of listening to her on the phone, interviewing and working her sources, which was always a daily source of inspiration. After I got over that, I put up my hand immediately because I just think it's a wonderful beat. It's a beat everyone knows, everyone understands it because they intersect with it in one way or another. And I love writing about things that are relevant to our readers. So it's wonderful for that. And I just think it's a fascinating industry. It's an industry undergoing a lot of change. It has been for many, many years, but this is a real inflection point. So I think it's a prime beat, and I feel very fortunate to be on it.
Well, it's certainly an inflection point upon an inflection point. I mean, even in the before time, pre-COVID, there was a tremendous transformation. I never bought into the retail apocalypse narrative, but there's tremendous transformation. And now with COVID, it's something's been accelerated, and it feels like some things are new. So I really want to kind of pull the curtain back, or the lens on that. Now, take us inside your tradecraft a little bit. So, when you look, the one thing about retail is nonstop. There's always stories about retail, and there's a bit of a rhythm to it, right? I mean, from holiday to these holidays, to summer, to spring, to back to school. So there's a bit of rhythm. How do you balance off in your tradecraft as a reporter, the kind of the focus on the larger stories versus the day-to-day, week-to-week? Last week we had Sobeys buys Empire, so that's a one you're going to obviously spend a bit of time on. But how do you balance those two things in your reporting?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that changes for every reporter, and it also changes for different times. So I took over the beat in late 2019. Goodness knows none of us could have seen what was barreling toward us. And it was a bit of a baptism by fire on this beat. And I would say that actually so far, the balance between longer term stories and shorter term stories was probably a little out of whack because we were just chasing the news as it happened at such a furious pace. So part of that balance is something I'm recalibrating right now. Not that we're finished with COVID, but we're getting back to a time when I think the pace of stories is slightly back to normal. So I would say that at any given time, I always have at least one or two major projects on the go, which I am working on whenever Sobeys isn't buying Longo, whenever there's a day when I'm not on deadline and there's news happening. And so I sort of am always juggling at least two or three or four things so that, I've always got something on the go. I know at the Globe, one of the things that we like to do is, try to put our reporting resources toward stories you can't read anywhere else. Whether it's scoops, we love exclusives, or it's explaining the industry to people in a way no one else is doing, or providing a deeper dive into certain issues. And so that's something I know my editors want me and all my colleagues to be focusing at all times. So I would say I'm not unusual in that sense, that probably every other reporter you speak to in my department is doing the same balancing act between news of the day and always working on at least one or two bigger things.
And I guess with more experience in the industry, does it develop a different sense of what is a more important story for your readers than less? I mean, some are quite obvious, the whole COVID impact, but even nested within that, I guess as days and months go by, I'm sure you have a different appreciation for the stories and what is, what fits that mandate of something unique, something insightful, and something compelling for the readers.
Definitely. I think, what fits that mandate, there are a number of things that can make that determination. I think when it hits Canadians in the pocketbook, that's an obvious one. We love to write stories that, help people understand the way that retailers are shifting how they serve customers and, that affect people's buying habits, affect customers directly. I think that's one thing. Another thing, obviously, because we are a business publication, we're interested in the kinds of things that shareholders would be interested in, to see strategy stories, big moves that companies are making, how they're thinking about their future and whether they're keeping up with that future. That's another big one. And then, I wouldn't discount things that are, the small business side of things. Just because we're a big paper doesn't mean we only cover big companies. We've been very focused, especially in the last year and a half or so, on the impact of all of this on the small businesses that fuel our economy to such a great degree. And so many of those are in the retail space. All of the trends that affect big companies, we also want to be looking at how they affect not just mom and pop shops, but small to medium sized enterprises as well. There's so many across the country that are so interesting that I haven't gotten the chance to even get to know yet. Normally I'd be going all over the place trying to get to know people in person, and hopefully we'll get back to that real soon.
Well, it brings up an interesting question. Who do you write for? Because you're in the business section of the paper generally, but not always. Are you writing for the business community? Are you writing for consumers to understand? I guess you just articulated you're kind of writing for both, but do you pick a spot where you more orient yourself to?
I think it varies. I think ideally I'm writing for both. Ideally, I'm writing for everybody. And especially at the Globe, I think the business section wants to be a place where young readers can go and find stories they're interested in as well. And so things that are too inside baseball, things that are, too industry focused, I don't think necessarily serve us all that well. At the same time, we want to be writing those high level strategy stories. So it really varies story to story. But, I think ideally speaking, the balance of my coverage is really for everybody. And it just depends on the story that I'm writing in terms of the focus.
I had the opportunity to interview Marina actually the last week when she was at the Globe and Mail, and I was kidding her. I said, for my 20 years, her name would appear on the phone, and there'd be panic. Oh my goodness, it's Marina. Do I pick it up or not? And I was kidding her about it. Some anxiety creating. Oh my goodness, the reporter's calling from the Globe and Mail. Give me some advice from your perspective when you call retailers. What's the best way to interact with you, to interact with reporters, and on the other side, we'll talk about a second part of the question. What's the best way to get your attention if you've got a great story to tell? So when you see your name on the call display or coming through or in your email box, what's your advice to retailers?
Yeah, pick up, please. That would be great.
Step one, yeah.
I think that the answer to both of those questions is actually kind of the same, Michael. I think that it is tempting to want to have a PR strategy for everything, to want to have those gatekeepers in the way. The way Marina functioned and the way that I want to function in this industry as I get to know people is to be talking to the decision makers. And the best way to either deal with me when I'm calling or get my attention is to make sure that I'm in touch with those decision makers, because I can't do my job if I'm not talking to the people who know what's going on in their companies on the ground. And while I respect my colleagues in the PR profession, I'm happy to deal with them and work with them. And I know that a CEO can't take my calls at all hours of the day. That's understandable. But I think, the biggest thing I would say is to have me in touch with those decision makers, because it's not only good for me, it's obviously what I want, but I think it's also better for the stories, because it leads me down paths that I might not otherwise explore. When I'm talking to gatekeepers, I don't always get those side conversations where someone will say to me, what I'm really preoccupied with this week that you should really look into. And that's where sometimes the best ideas come from. And the more I'm talking to people, not just at the C-suite level, by the way, there are lots of decision makers, lots of important people all throughout these companies that I think I should be in touch with. But the more I'm talking to people on the ground, I think the better it is for everyone, the better I can tell those stories authentically, which is, I think, at the end of the day, what retailers should want is for the story of their business to be told as authentically and as truthfully as possible.
Yeah, I guess, can you imagine some risk in that? I was talking to a reporter, and he had just moved over from, I think it was the crime beat. Like, it's hard to get people on the phone to tell their whole story. And I said, well, it's a bit different, because some people's, their careers are not on the line, but sometimes they don't want the story to be told. Like, can you see the other side of that?
Oh, sure, I can. Yeah, no, it's obviously the easier thing to do is not to talk and not to risk saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But what I would say about that is, yes, it's safer. It's safer and easier to just not talk. But, I think that companies have a responsibility to their customers to be transparent about the way they're doing business with them. And they have a responsibility to their shareholders to be transparent about the way they're managing their strategy. And I don't have to be the vehicle through which that story gets told, but I'm certainly one of them, and I'm not going away. And the media, and when I say me, I mean all of us in media, right? So, while it is probably more comfortable occasionally to take a little bit of a cautious approach, and from time to time it even may make more sense, I think ultimately it's the companies that are transparent and that are really good at telling their stories that resonate. And so, I mean, I believe that not only should they, but I also think they have a responsibility to answer those questions when they come up.
I mean, my philosophy has always been it's better to have an ongoing conversation rather than have to speak, once a year about an issue or once a year when something comes up. So that kind of, would you agree, kind of developing that every now and then conversation with you on an ongoing basis is better than popping in and out, when there's an issue or when there's an opportunity. It feels like that would work best. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And, to the extent that Marina struck fear in the hearts of retailers, I think because she was so smart and so good at what she did. The thing about that is, when that name popped up on your screen, you could not answer the phone, but the chance was she had the story. So you were going to have to deal with it eventually.
Very funny. Because I knew Marina back when I was at Hudson's Bay Company, and I've been on both sides or all three sides of that. So it's funny. We'll be back in a minute. If you like this interview, hit subscribe and catch up on the Voice of Retail episodes you might have missed, like my exclusive interview with Lauren Chan, founder and CEO of Henning, and you'll get new episodes delivered directly to you. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the need for businesses to undergo a digital transformation. Through the Toronto's Regional Board of Trade's Recovery Activation Program, otherwise known as RAP, you can now immerse yourself in online sessions, workshops, and one-on-one mentorships with industry experts to learn how your businesses can get ahead through digital solutions. Whether your business is having difficulty connecting with customers or struggling to manage increasing demand, RAP offers practical support and advice at no cost, helping your business build back stronger and smarter. Wondering how you can get started? Well, your business is a RAP journey begins with Digital Needs Assessment, or a DNA. The DNA takes less than 30 minutes to complete and offers an assessment of your business's current digital maturity, benchmarked against companies of similar size from related sectors from around the country. Based on your results, RAP's team of industry experts will contact you to discuss which programs will be most useful in helping you take the next step in your digital transformation. From helping you build your personalized digital transformation blueprint to tailoring and outcome-driven modules based on cybersecurity and digital marketing tools, there's a RAP program to support you and your business. In under a year, RAP will have analyzed more than 1,000 Ontario businesses, hosted more than 4,000 virtual event attendees, and maintained 100% overall participation satisfaction. Remember, there's no cost to participate. So to ensure your business is ready to capitalize on those exciting opportunities for digital growth, take your digital needs assessment today at rap.bot.com. That's rap.bot.com. All right, so you've been on the retail scene for a while. It's not an ordinary retail scene, and we're not in an ordinary cycle. But as you say, we're starting to transition thanks to the miracle of the vaccine. There's an end point to all of this. And one question I've been asking a lot of retail executives is, there's decisions you make and strategies that you put in place in the short term to deal with the day-to-day issues of that are unique to the COVID era. But I'm trying to get a sense of what are the kind of structural changes and structural issues that are going to be post-COVID, that are going to be with us as we move forward. Are you starting to get a sense for that? And is that a point of inquiry for you as you kind of ride up this steep learning curve of the industry?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't know that I have the answer to the question as to what's going to stick, but I have a couple of good guesses. I think the pandemic accelerated, as you said, the move to e-commerce, which not everyone embraced to the extent that they probably should have earlier on. And I understand why. It's expensive to do e-commerce right. And when you're already steering a complex ship that is a retail business, it can be tempting not to sort of tackle that beast. So I understand why that moved a little slower than maybe it otherwise could have. But I think that the pandemic really highlighted that was somewhere that retailers need to be, and not just need to be reluctantly, by the way. They need to be there and take it seriously. And I think in Canada, there has been an extent to which some retailers have dipped their toes in e-commerce reluctantly because it is expensive, because it is hard to do well, and because, frankly, you're competing against a couple of deep-pocketed global giants who are making the economics of it really tricky. And so I understand why that is, but I think that, you'll rarely see me accede to using the word omni-channel in my coverage. I really hate that word. I think it's just retail, Omni-channel really is just retail. You've got to be in both places. You've got to do both, unless you're online only, in which case, more power to you. But if you're
there's even fewer of those, right? I mean, you see a lot of retailers
going the other way.
Going the other way, right? They didn't get the memo that stores are finished. You've got a lot of retailers going the other way. And when I look at, and I've been both an operator and an analyst and an advocate, I've often attributed Canada's, growth or position in e-commerce to what I call diseconomy of scale. We're a vast nation, and, we are from a consumer adoption perspective behind, but now things are starting to pick up. I think that's this great leap forward, so to speak. Now the volumes are there. And as you know, in retail, volume solves some sins, right? I've often talked about that in the curbside. So what three things, I'll transition here to what has surprised you? So it's one thing to sit beside the retail reporters, another thing to have those shoes on, so to speak. Is there anything that has surprised you about the retail industry in your time covering it?
Well, I think everything's been a surprise. I don't think anyone could have expected what the last year has been like. So I would say pretty much everything. Yeah, everything is a surprise. No, I think the beat itself is, this is an industry where there's just always something to explore. And so if anything has surprised me, I actually don't know if it's a surprise. I think it's an incredibly rich area for inquiry, and I just love that. And as I say, sitting beside the retailer reporter is not the same as being the retail reporter. But,
right.
I have the benefit of having been Marina's colleague for as long as I have. I got a good sense, even working with her. We collaborated on stories through the course of my time working with her. I learned a lot from her, and I think I got a good sense of things from her. So I didn't have a whole lot of surprises because she had been kind enough to mentor me and continues to even after she's gone. And so, there's a wonderful resource I have in Marina. I can't sing her praises enough. I just have all the respect in the world for her work. So thanks to her, I think there have not been a ton of surprises.
Yeah, right on. Well, you mentioned a couple of things, kind of the long form, so to speak. Give us a sense, if you can, a glimpse into the stories you think are going to be the most important to follow in 2021. What are the kind of 2 or 3 stories that really you want to delve into and you think will be the most important stories coming out of?
What we were just talking about, digital is one. I would actually challenge sort of how conservative the Canadian customer is on that adoption piece. I think adoption follows the quality of the offering, and some of the slower adoption on e-commerce in Canada may have had to do with the breadth and the quality of the offering in the past. So, now that we're seeing more, curbside services, more delivery services, just retailers catching up, I think, to what was a latent trend there. There's a bit of chicken and egg in terms of where the consumer goes, which I think is really interesting. And it'll be interesting to follow that now that these services are sort of proliferating. So that's a big one. I think that another big story that I'm going to be following is sustainability. And we are, as a paper, really committed to coverage of sustainability. And by that, I do not mean sustainability commitments and things like getting to carbon neutral. I mean real, actual systemic change in terms of how companies think about how they need to do business more sustainably. Because retail and things like packaging may not be the biggest impact on the environment, but they're a big impact. And more importantly, customers see the impact they have in their own consumption habits on the planet. And so, one of the first, in fact, the first big feature I wrote on this beat way back in, holiday 2019, about a million years ago, was about plastic packaging. And what I said in that piece was that, customers, it's going to be a pain point when they take home that packaging or they see it arrive at their door. They think about the choices they're making when they're with their wallets, and retailers are on the front lines of consumers' feelings about those things. So it really is incumbent on them to think about, what impact that has on their brand, because consumers who want to make responsible decisions are going to be demanding that companies do better. So I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch, particularly as we have the luxury of focusing, hopefully soon enough, slightly less on the pandemic and more on the future of the business. So, those are two big threads.
And that file went a little sideways, so to speak, for all of us in the industry. The beginning of the pandemic, right, switched back to plastic bags, and we were all a bit concerned about, sustainability. Almost took a brief back seat in the early days, I would say, of the COVID era. But I always thought it would come roaring back. In other words, it's not gone. And in fact, I think given how much time we think about ourselves and the planet and all these things, it might come back even stronger, perhaps, than it was heading into the COVID era.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the other big thread to pull will likely be, this whole buy local thing that has popped up during the pandemic, with people wanting to support their communities and the businesses that make their communities what they are. I'm really curious to see how much of that sticks around as things start to go back to normal, and what impact that starts to have. That's an answer I don't have yet, but it's something I'm going to be watching really closely.
It's a really interesting point, because there's so many things coming together. One of them is like the work from home movement. What number of people work from home, and therefore many people would shop closer to home just organically, versus the supply chain. How do you figure out the supply chain, which right now is a real pain point for retailers at almost every node. So it is does in some ways local fixes that. In other commodities, it doesn't at all. There's just not the capacity to really solve that issue. But I think it's a really worthy line of inquiry for sure. Okay, last question. Is there anything else you'd like to add? I'm kidding with that question, because I get that question all the time. Okay, I got a question for you. How many times does that become the most interesting answers in your interview, when you just throw out is there anything else you haven't told me yet? Does that, does that work?
It works pretty well. Although being on the other side of it, I am regretting inflicting it upon people, because my brain is blank. I think, it is actually, it is just a wonderful industry. And I think what I will say is, as things open up, I think what's going to be fascinating to watch is, we have this industry that's taken such a big hit, and all you have to do is walk around a neighborhood to see how the shape of the neighborhood has changed. Those vacant storefronts, what those look like, how they reshape a community. I think people have a real sense, and I'm not just talking about, classic retail, I'm talking about restaurants and bars here too. I think people have a real sense of the way these businesses not only provide them goods and services, but also shape the faces of their communities. So I think that something that is going to be really interesting in this industry is, how do those local retailers, or even big retailers who are part of a local community, how do they tell that story? How do they keep that relationship going? And how do also neighborhoods come back? Because there's a lot of gaps now that need to be filled, unfortunately. And equally, though, a lot of opportunity for people who have the ability to start something new right now. And so I'm really excited. I feel almost like I'm bringing down the evil eye talking this way, because we're certainly not at the end of this, as I said. But I'm really excited for the end of this, not only, to hug my niece again, but also to watch the industry and what happens, and how these neighborhoods come back and what kind of innovation happens. I really, really hope that the retailers who've been forced to do things like curbside pickup and to beef up their e-commerce presences, I hope that innovation continues. Because as I said before, I don't think the consumer is as conservative as we think. I think they're willing to move when the services are good and when innovation happens. And so I'm really hoping that I'll get to cover a lot of innovation in this industry going forward.
Well, Susan, thanks for your support of the industry. I mean, you bring great insight and you chronicle the industry well. And I'm a big fan of reporting and the media here in Canada. And you do a wonderful job. And it's really a necessary function of the ecosystem. And thank you again. And I wish you continued success and continued great reporting. And thanks for joining me on The Voice of Retail.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating and review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of LeBlanc Company Inc. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Visit my website at meleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe and have a great week.